Hello there. Welcome to my storytelling series called Stories Shorten the Road. And I thought I would begin by telling you the story that gave me the title for this series. It comes from Ireland. It comes from a time, so long ago that, the first tree had just been planted on this earth. And even that long ago, there was a blacksmith. He was called the wondersmith. Blacksmiths could do anything with metal and with all sorts of gems. They could make jewelry, they could shoe horses, they could make nails, and they could build. They could build castles and everything you could possibly think of. And so they were considered magical beings. And the wondersmith was the wondersmith of Celtic myth. The Govan Sor was his name. He was so clever that they say if he was building a building and the beams were very high up and he had to get his nails up there, nails that he had made in his own forge, he just tossed them up and they landed where they were supposed to. And immediately he tossed up the hammer and the hammer hammered them in and he caught the hammer on the way down. Someone that clever was never out of work and very busy. Now, the wondersmith also had a son. He was young and had really no training or skills yet. In fact, probably the only useful thing he had done so far in his life was to marry a clever wife. And one day word came from the king who lived at the end of the world. Would the wondersmith come and build him a castle, and he would reward him with a great fortune. In fact, maybe the wondersmith might never need to work again with a fortune so great. And he decided to take his son with him. It's time my son looked into learning a trade, and besides, another pair of hands would be very useful for this work. The son agreed and said goodbye to his wife the next morning, and the father and son set off to walk to the end of the world, and it would be a long walk. They hadn't gone very far when the wondersmith said to his son, "Will you shorten the road for me?" "Well, yes, father, but how am I supposed to do that if you can't even shorten it with your 2 feet?" The wondersmith turned around and walked back home. And what could his son do but follow? They weren't going anywhere that day. The next day they set out again. And, the son had thought during the night what he could say if his father asked him. And they went maybe a little bit further than they'd gone the day before, and the wondersmith said, "Son, will you shorten the road for me?" "Yes, I will, father." And the son raced up ahead, up the hill that was just in front of them, looked behind, hoping his father would walk really quickly in order to catch up with them, and in that way shorten the road. Now, how do you think somebody could shorten the road? Maybe you would have as much trouble as the son trying to figure out what this father meant. At any rate, the wondersmith turned around and went back home, and the son knew he was disappointed in him. But what could he do? He sat down right then and there and put his head in his hands, and he started to try to think about the ways to shorten a road. And the more he thought, the harder it became. And finally, he went home too. And his wife noticed all these things, and she said, "You've gone twice on your way to the king at the end of the world, and you've come home both times, and you look pretty sad and frustrated. What's happened?" "Oh," said the son, "my father keeps asking me to do impossible things. Each day we've set out, he's asked me to shorten the road. I've tried, but he hasn't liked any of my suggestions. How can anybody shorten the road, I ask you?" "Oh," said the wife, smiling, she said, "Silly you. Everyone knows that the way to shorten the road is to tell stories as you're walking along, and before long, you're there." "No," said the son. "Really? Is that what my father meant? Oh, I know what to do now because, well, I know lots of stories. I know stories about giants and magical trees and horses and ships that sail on the sea. Oh my gosh, and snowmen and reindeer and princesses and princes and kings and queens. And he could hardly wait till the next day to come. And he kissed his wife goodbye, and the wondersmith and his son set off again. And they walked this time past the hill that the wondersmith's son had run up the day before. And the wondersmith turned to his son and he said, "Son, will you shorten the road for me?" "Yes, I will, father," said the son. And he started to tell him stories. Long stories, short stories, funny stories, stories full of drama, stories full of adventure. And before they knew it, they had reached the kingdom at the end of the world. And they set to building the castle for the king. And true to his word, he rewarded them with 2 huge bags full of treasure, a fortune for them, and they carried them home. And whether the wondersmith worked at all anymore or not, the story doesn't say. But now the son knew 2 things that he didn't know before. He knew how satisfying it was to build something with your 2 hands. And he knew how to shorten the road by telling a good story. And I hope you enjoy all the stories that I tell you in this series, and that it helps you to not mind too much having to stay home with this coronavirus until we get rid of it and all get vaccinated and can resume somewhat normal life. So, come again and listen to another story.